Hi guys, just another quick video about this sticker here that I recently pulled off the front screen. So obviously this is what all new cars get in Australia as far as the energy efficiency or how green the car is. Obviously for combustion cars you'll get the CO2 emissions and the litres per 100 miles, or MPGs in American terms, that you would expect to get. Obviously with the EV we have the energy consumption, and that WHKM is a normal measurement that most people use, watt hours per kilometers, and then the range obviously is how much range you can expect for a full tank of volts. So just on this and the sort of the scam or the misdirection that Tesla's had, and that I'm not sure how many people are aware of this, but there is a class action against Tesla at the moment for a few things combined, and the two big standouts were and are the autopilot and what was promised versus the functionality you get, and I'll talk about that on a separate thread. But the other part of that class action was the range, and so a lot of people get stung with the range, and I think I mentioned this briefly in my first video, but I'll talk about it a bit now. That with the dual motor, for example, the range advertised here for a full battery charge is around 629 kilometers. And obviously they must have achieved that in one of their tests to prove that it is capable, but real world metro driving, you're going to get far less than that. So this is where people get a bit annoyed or feel like they've been false pretenced by this sticker or the so-called long range motor versus what you get in a basic model, because as I explained in the previous video, but I'll explain now briefly. So the long range motor has the NMC battery, the base model has the LFP battery, and the performance model has the NMC battery. I'm not going to get into what that means. I will promise that I will do a separate video on that, but essentially what that really does mean in real world terms is the NMC batteries, for battery life and degradation and best practice, you really should only be charging up to around 80% of the capacity. And don't get it below 20. For the LFP batteries, you can actually go to 100% and drain it down to, 12, 15, 10%, whatever your heart desires. So there's pros and cons for that, but what that really means, obviously with this car, it's a dual motor and the performance, if you want to dial in best long-term battery health versus your driving habits, you're already 20% behind the 8 ball because you're only charging 80%. So what that means is, of course, is your range is immediately hampered because you're not going to get the extra 20% of that range, particularly in long distances. So when I say what is a real world figure, what you really could expect, going from 80% to say 20% in a typical metro driving suburbia environment with not too much frugal use of the accelerator, shall we say, then the real world range, what you could expect between that 60% battery drain from 80 to 20. The reality is, look, you're probably only sitting around 300 Ks. So 300 or 400 is what you should expect. So range is a factor. Range anxiety is real, and people do feel quite aggrieved with what they get versus what they've been promised. The base model is a little bit different. Like I said, with the LFP battery, you have much more of the wider spectrum of use through the battery range of 20 to 100%. The battery type itself is obviously LFP, so it allows for that without degradation and hurting the battery. And also what you do get is what you normally get is a single motor rear wheel drive car. So naturally the voltage and the consumption of the car is a lot better because you're only dealing with single motor versus two motors on the dual range. The downside is, of course, that you don't have the actual power available as far as performance goes compared to the long range. So the base model is a bit slower, but arguably the range of the base model is very close to the long range in real world terms. So the question you should be asking yourself is, if I want the long range, am I really getting it for the additional range of kilometers because it really isn't that much seen, or am I actually getting it for a better performance habit? And the answer is probably, if you're doing it for performance, no dramas. If you think it's going to be a miracle on the long range side, you'll be sadly mistaken. We'll speak more on that later, but I just wanted to clear that. As far as the actual energy consumption of 140, you're actually probably going to get around that. So that's probably factual, and that's sort of a baseline. And what that really means is that number there basically replaces the litres per 100 kilometres as far as the real world economics of the motor. So, you know, whereas most 4 cylinders aiming between, you know, 7 to 10 litres, and a thirsty 6 cylinder 12 litres, and a V8 16 litres plus per 140 watt hours per 100 kilometers is what you sort of expect to get in this range. And if you're getting that number, that means you're probably driving it in a normal standard manner. And you can actually check that on the Tesla itself through here. These things are called cards, by the way. If you slide here, I'll get to this later, but see, my lifetime, I'm actually averaging 144 watt hours per kilometer. So that tells me that I'm sitting at around the expected range of a 140, and that's a good indicator of your driving habits, your battery health, and other factors that are draining the battery, as a good indicator for how you drive and how the car's performing. Just thought I'd clear that up with that sticker. My next video I'll cover the battery types, but any questions or comments, let me know. But I just wanted to clear that up as far as range anxiety, what you should expect, and why this sticker is quite controversial as far as Tesla owners and people being quite aggrieved with what they've been told versus what the reality is. So please don't be misinformed when you're driving a Tesla and what you expect to get from a Tesla. The truth is somewhere in the middle. You're not going to get these numbers in a real world driving habit.